Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Julian Soles, who's the CEO of First Mode, who are a global carbon reduction company focused on heavy industry and exists to solve the most dire and pressing problems for people and our planet. Julian has a background in architectural and engineering and has worked in the naval and marine space for most of his career before moving into the mining sector with Anglo America to be their head of technology, developing and implementing step change new technologies and practices focusing on reducing water, energy consumption, minimizing land disturbance, waste production, preventing soil, water and air pollution at mine sites, and conducting successful mine closures and reclamation activities. Today, he's going to talk about First Mode and what they've been doing to help decarbonise the mining industry. So that's welcome, Julian, to the podcast. How you doing, Julian?
Good, thanks, Rob. Well, thanks a lot for having me today.
Yeah, appreciate your time as well. We've had a few false starts, but we've managed to get talking. So as we always start these podcasts off, just wondering if you can give a sort of career summary. Tell us a little bit about your career, how it's developed. So our audience knows a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'll try to fill in the gaps. So obviously you described a lot of it just there. So originally grew up in Birmingham in the UK, went to London and studied naval architecture. So an engineering degree, but focused on marine, as you said. After that, I actually in 2001 moved to the States and worked in offshore engineering, working for offshore drilling contractors. And what really drew me to that was when I was at university, one of our lecturers he'd always be late, like 20 minutes late. And he was like, I was just on the phone with BP. They're trying to do this big complex lift in the North Sea and I needed to help them. And he explained it all from first principles and really kind of apply that engineering knowledge to the problem. And it kind of got me excited about, I think that's an interesting industry to go into. So I did my master's, I stayed on actually, I did my master's and then got a job in offshore engineering and moved to the States and was over there for about 7-8 years in total, and did about 4 or 5 years in engineering before moving to operations. And it was really that sense of where's the business drivers, how can I deliver the most value and have the biggest difference? And whilst the engineering was a really good foundation, understanding the basics of how everything works, particularly in offshore, being able to then go and manage operations and put that into practice was something that really interested me. During that time as well, I went to the University of Houston, studied my MBA, which also helped me understand the business fundamentals better and drivers around that. From there, I went on and moved to Switzerland. There was a couple of years in corporate finance in the head office, which is a really different view of strategy and company direction. And from there, went on and lived in Perth in Australia, which was kind of my first exposure actually to mining, to be honest, because we grew the business there from a few hundred people to nearly 800 by the time I left over a few years. And we were constantly battling between, the craftsmen or tradesmen moving between offshore and mining, depending on who was booming and who wasn't. And so it was really interesting. Obviously, Perth's a real hotspot for mining, and it's where actually there's a significant piece of First Mode there today in terms of office. So I was there for about 4 years as country manager, and then went back to Houston during downturn. And then in the space of a few years, I probably had 5 or 6 different jobs, just fixing different problems within the company, working on really tough challenges from, reimagining our supply chain through to eliminating projects, which is a big problem. Every time we stop to do a project, you're not earning revenue. And so how can we do that more efficiently? And we did a lot of that work in Australia and took that to the company. But during that period, I actually went in and started the company's digital transformation and also technology innovation. And so we started a number of projects around that. And from there, that's where kind of got the opportunity to move across to Anglo American. During that period before moving to Anglo, I was lucky enough to be sent on a course for a couple of months where you have the opportunity you don't get a chance to do any work. You just end up focusing on yourself actually, and kind of self-reflection and learning. And it was during this period of time that I kind of realized that actually what I wanted to do was have a bigger impact. The oil and gas space, one of the things I do recognize is there needs to be a transition, an orderly one. And so oil and gas is needed, but also we need to get ourselves off of it. And so as I was looking at my career, and I've got a young family as well, and wanting to look back at the impact I could have, I decided that actually I wanted to move into more of the energy transition role than I had. So the opportunity with Anglo American came up as head of technology for sustainability. And what they were looking for there was someone who could bring different thinking to it, not classical, mining, or just someone who's got a track record of thinking differently, implementing innovative solutions. And I did that and moved across in 2018 to Anglo American. And it was there that I started looking very differently at how you decarbonize. I think a lot of people look at the problem from, I've got a small segment, I need to decarbonize, let's say, trucks, or this piece of equipment, or this part of the process, rather than saying we're looking at it from, we need to decarbonize the whole mine. And if you look at it from a system, then you can start putting it together in different ways. And that's what we really did with landing on the solution, the new gen solution that we're developing at First Mode today.
So obviously you recently took a CEO role with First Mode. I just wondered if you can just tell us about the recent combination of Anglo American's new gen project with First Mode.
Sure. So as I mentioned, then we started in mid 2018 with Anglo American, and it was probably, I've been in the job a couple of months before I was introduced to First Mode, and First Mode today actually is our 5th anniversary. And it was around, they started maybe a few months earlier. And First Mode's approach to problem solving is using systems engineering. The heritage a lot is in space, and bringing that real fundamental first principles look at the problem. And I'd done some work around what I thought was potential solution for decarbonizing the mine. But what I wanted to do was have someone look at it, critique it, tell me I was wrong, or put the maths and the physics to it, and work from there. And that's what First Mode did. And it was from there that I've been working with them for the past 4.5 years. And in that time, First Mode has grown from 11 people to 250 in that process, primarily made up of engineers, and really attracted phenomenal talent to bring to the project, which is what's needed actually. And so within Anglo at the same time, we were looking at, okay, we've done our proof of concept solution, which we launched in May the 5th last year in South Africa at Mogalakwena mine. And we needed to commercialize. We always planned to scale up. And so the obviously question was, do you do that with an Anglo American? Do you do this? How do you do this such that it would be accepted by the mining industry? Also, current OEMs within the industry and partners. And so we really had a strong feeling that actually, if we could combine with First Mode to create a separate entity that could go in and deliver to the industry, more broader industry, that would be much more powerful, much more likely to succeed. And also Anglo American's more likely to get its solution, which is to decarbonize its haulage. And so that was the main driver as why we did that. And so we've combined the business on January the 5th, it officially closed, and the new First Mode was started. But one of the other things that came with that business combination was actually a very large supply agreement with Anglo American, and that's basically to decarbonize 7 of their mines, which contain approximately 400 ultra-class trucks. And so over the next 15 years, we are now building to deliver into that supply agreement. And so if you think about, we've got initial funding, we have a very knowledgeable set of engineers that actually been working on this problem for the past 4 years. And we actually know what we want to do next in terms of product development and the roadmap. And we have a supply agreement and a customer already there. So a lot of the time, if you have a startup, they've got a great idea, they don't necessarily have the customers. Well, we're fortunate that we've got a great customer, we've got the idea and the ability to bridge between the two. And now we're able to also talk more broadly to other customers to start bringing them in. And so those things are actively going on right now.
The mining industry has been increasingly setting ESG targets, particularly obviously around decarbonisation. What are the biggest challenges in meeting these decarbonisation targets? And are there paths forward that are particularly promising?
Sure, yeah. So kind of, if you're going to break out what are the big scope or emissions drivers for mining. So most of the emissions associated with mining come from electricity generation. So typically, if you connect to the grid, it would be called scope 2. Some mines have their own diesel generators to generate power because they're so far off grid that you classify those as scope 1. But a lot of the big mines are kind of scope 2. And the emissions, the size of the emissions depends on the grid you're on. If it's a coal-fired grid, very high. Also, the type of mineral that you have as well, because some take huge amounts of processing power. And so some of our mines can have like a 200 megawatt baseload requirement for largely driven by comminution, which is crushing of the rock. And so if you look at that, and it's as one aspect of it, that has to be eliminated. A lot of that is going to be solved with renewable power, wind and solar. That's where everyone's going. The problem, though, with doing that is you introduce huge amounts of variability into the grid because it's not continuous. Obviously, solar is just during the day, wind is on and off. And so then the grid has to contend with huge amounts of swing in power. So that's one thing, and I'll talk about why that's important in a second. But the other part is scope 1, which is diesel. And if you look at open pit mines, for example, the largest diesel contributor is from these very large ultra-class haul trucks. About 80% typically, 70 to 80% of the total consumption is in the vehicles. And so when we looked at that as well, we're kind of like, well, if you think about the mine as a system, what we want to do is eliminate scope 1 and scope 2. Scope 3 is something that people are starting to address, but not many people have targets on scope 3, which is more associated with the supply chain around what you're bringing in. But scope 1 and 2 is much more direct in terms of your use. And so when we looked at the problem and said, okay, if we look at the mine as a system and we're trying to get the best outcome across the system, you can't look at necessarily the grid and the diesel. If you looked in isolation, you come up with a different solution. And so if you take it, like say, embracing this variability, where if I put a solar field in and I'm over generating to meet my baseload requirements, what that means is you have excess power during the day. And some places you can sell that back into the grid, other places you can't. And so you typically, and because of the cost of renewables is a lot less than what you get off the grid, the economics are, you can start looking at that and going, okay, if I have excess power, what can I use that in? And then I can use it to bring down the cost of other solutions. And when we looked at haulage, we looked at everything. We looked at biodiesel, we looked at natural gas, we looked at other solutions. And essentially we came down to the set of, we want a solution that will have no local emissions, which drove us to 100% electric. So either battery, or really, it was a hydrogen-based system. Mainly, the hydrogen is driven by we need range and energy density. And so, but when you bring them together, if you look at the power generation aspects of it, and you look at the system, if you're able to balance that with something else, in this case, when we looked at it, hydrogen was a really good balancer for that system, and then you could use it in the haulage because it looked like the best solution for that because of the range you can get. As long as you can bring that cost down to be competitive with diesel, then you'll have a solution that gives you the same flexibility that you have in your mine today, which is really important for the miners, at a cost that is almost parity to diesel. And that's the path that we're on. But it's essentially, if you just looked at the haul truck in isolation without thinking about that grid component, you would arrive at a solution. This is too expensive to do. We're too far off to do this. And that was some of the different thinking we did. And so when we did that, we then went into, all right, we look what's existing in this system, what needs to be developed. And we engage with all of, well, and so we looked at it, so hydrogen generation's been around for nearly 100 years in electrolyzers. You've got renewable power, we have refueling gaseous systems. And so we also have, the trucks are diesel electric as well, the ones we have. So essentially the thing that was missing was a very high powered zero emission engine to replace the diesel. And so we spoke to the OEMs, their timelines and their kind of willingness to develop that was not high. And so this is where, after the initial work that we did with First Mode, we went back and said, hey, would you be interested in designing the next one, the next phase? And it just grew from there, and the company grew from there to ultimately where we actually built the whole ecosystem in South Africa. We installed the power plant. So it's a 2 megawatt peak power plant, which is a hybrid of fuel cells and batteries, and basically made the world's first and world's largest zero emission haul truck. So it's got the same payload, circa 300 tons as the vehicle does today. Fully laden, the whole thing weighs 520 tons. And so it's fully operational, all electric in South Africa, and it's in operation right now.
I wonder if you can just tell us more about the new gen solution.
Sure. So yeah. So one of the things that, again, looking at from a system, we have to replace diesel, right? And so you can create and design a truck, but if it's got no fuel to go in it, it's no good to anyone. And then you start going back and you're like, well, refueling, it's going to be different. You can't do obviously diesel refueling's been around for a long time. It's well known. The interfaces are well known. Everyone knows how to do it. So we have to replace that as well. And then you start looking about, well, how do I store this new fuel? Whether it's in this case here, whether you go 100% battery or whether you go with hydrogen, you still got to do this. How am I going to charge it? Where am I going to store the energy? Can I rely on the grid all the time? And you've got to answer all these questions. So you go back through the whole system. And so when we look at new gen, we look at the full system. So you go back to where's the source of the green electrons, and essentially think about custody of that electron all the way through to drive at the wheels. So you go, where's my renewable energy coming from? How am I going to generate, in this case, hydrogen? Where am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? Is it suitably sized? Because we got to bring the cost down. You can oversize the system and it costs you a lot of money. So it's really important that you size it appropriately to give the reliability that the mine needs. And then you go, well, how am I going to refuel? Because there's no way around it. Whatever solution we go with, hydrogen, battery, you're going to have to refuel more often. Diesel's an amazing energy storage medium, and we haven't got anything near it. And so what we're trying to do is get the same performance. What we don't want to do is say, here's your solution, but you need to double the size of your haulage fleet because it has to be parked up, or you have to stop it every hour because you've got to recharge or refuel it. So we have to rethink about how you refuel. How do you do it differently in the mine? How do we get the energy onto the vehicle efficiently? And then when it's on the vehicle, how do you use it efficiently? One of the reasons we have a large battery system is there's a lot of energy that needs to be recouped as you go back down into the pit. And if that's not captured, you end up using a lot more of your source energy. In this case would be using hydrogen. So we're trying to reduce the consumption as much as possible all the time. And so when we're doing the whole system, we want to basically here's a customer, here's a refueling system, or go buy the trucks from someone else and it's your problem. Not at all. We want to help them through it because there's many things around. It's a new technology. There's new operational requirements that are needed. We're going to have to do new training for people. The safety is different. And so it's a different set of risks to manage now. And so we have to do all of that. So one of the things about doing it in Mogalakwena on an active operational mine was we've done this already before for that. I mean, when the truck goes out, it's been into the pit, it's been under the shovel, it's been intermixed with the fleet. So we've been through this learning curve with the POC. Now we're doing it with the fleet, then it's different integrations into the fleet management system and so on. So we're basically taking that on ourselves to do because we have to, because otherwise we won't be able to deliver a system that the customer can actually use and adopt. So I think that's the big thing about the difference about how we go about it than anyone else. And so to be able to deliver that as well, we've got a lot of partnerships we've got in place because it's a full ecosystem, whether it be hydrogen production partnerships, whether it be fuel cell for what goes into the vehicle. There's many different ones across there. So that's one of the things that we do. And then also we've also got our own proving grounds we've put together in down in Centralia, which is about an hour and a half down from Seattle. And I was there last week to see the team. And essentially what we've got in Seattle now is we have the engineering. We're building also a manufacturing facility here for low-level production. And then we have what we call our test grounds, our proving grounds. And so our engineers are able to go between design, production, testing, all within, a few hours. So in one day, they could go to all different spots. And that'll help us really drive and move quickly, which is one of the other things that we need to do so we can get the system demonstrated at scale. So I think just in summary, it's really about a system solution, switching completely from diesel. You can't just do it in one piece and just focus on the truck, which I think a lot of the OEMs are. You have to look at the full system.
Obviously, talking about OEMs, how is First Mode's approach different than solutions offered by the traditional OEMs?
Yeah, so, well, I would say our approach is very different in that systems approach and actually ownership of the full problem. We know that, the OEMs typically, they provide in this case, a haulage solution, a truck. That's what they call a haulage solution. We call a haulage solution the whole thing. It's how do you get the energy onto site? How do you then manage it on site? How do you refuel efficiently? And then ultimately, how does the vehicle use it and operate? And so we take the full thing. So that's quite a different approach. Also, we're much more focused than the OEMs. We don't have big product lines. We've got one solution, the focus for decarbonisation. We don't have an existing production line making diesel engines. They're going to compete against capital for us. So we're very focused. I think we're a lot more agile as well because we don't have those competing priorities and we're able to go quickly. And one of the things is with our engineering team, a lot of them come from different backgrounds, whether it's automotive, whether it is space, but that mix is really important because for space. So one of the people that handle kind of cryogenic liquids, in this case, we're looking at liquid hydrogen. There's a lot of experience from that we can bring in, and we are bringing into our next systems. And the OEMs just don't have that capability yet. Not to say that they won't build it, but one of the things that attracts talent to us is our sole focus on decarbonisation, as opposed to a company that's making diesel engines at the same time. They're saying they're going to decarbonise and saying we'll have a vehicle by 2030. We're saying no, we're doing it now. We're not waiting. It's a super hard challenge, which is really attractive to engineers as well. And we've got a customer, so it's not like we're just, we don't have anyone to sell to. There is a market demand for it. So I think that really differentiates us from them. And again, we're really focused on moving quickly, and we learn by doing. You can study this problem and convince yourself not to do it. What we did during the POC, we actually went and built it, and we were like, wow, this worked really well. This is even better than we thought. And so the next stage is, I hope to see the same again in a next generation system, and go from there. But we're also focused on taking this beyond haulage as well. We're just starting here. We see opportunities rail in stationary power as well for these really high-powered, heavy-duty applications. And so really what's exciting is we're building a capability here at First Mode to be able to scale into these industries.
Obviously, you mentioned decarbonising the full infrastructure, not just obviously trucks. What does that entail? And also, how does that impact the mine site operations?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that already in terms of the infrastructure. So part of it is we have to look at, okay, how are we going to, in this case, how do you get the electrons efficiently into the vehicle? And there'll be different solutions depending on the mine site. And so there are existing trolley systems, for example, that can be used to power the wheel motors directly. And so how do you interface with that if that becomes full battery? One of the issues with full batteries, once you're off the trolley, you don't get much range. So you have to keep charging all the time. Whereas with the hydrogen system, you get a good range and you can probably refuel, depending on the mine, 2 to 3 times a day, is what the target is. But when you start looking at, okay, how am I going to get the fuel availability that I need? Right now, a diesel truck comes in, loads up, and you've got like 2 weeks supply of diesel. Well, to have 2 weeks supply of either electrons in battery form or in hydrogen is just cost prohibitive. And so we look at, okay, what is the right set? And you've got to then design if I'm going to have hydrogen production on site versus something off site, how do I design that such that if I need to do maintenance activity, it's not down for 2 weeks and there's no fuel? And so we look at that. How do you break it up? How do you get the reliability and availability of that system? And then, so once you have that, that's driven by the requirements by the haul trucks and how much material the mine needs to move. And that's really what feeds into the plan, which drives the number of trucks and then their utilization. And then the next piece is, okay, now I've made the fuel, how do I get it to the vehicle? Is you need strategies for making sure that you're not doing unnecessary movement of the vehicle. So what I'm talking about is you don't want to be driving 15 minutes with the truck empty to refuel. You want to be just pit stop on your haul route and refuel. Now the haul routes move all the time. And so part of our solution is, okay, the refueling location. A lot of mines do this as good practice now with diesel. They move them maybe every 6 months or a year when they know that the routes are fairly set to limit how far the vehicles need to come out. That's going to be standard practice for us. It's going to have to be. And so then you look at what's the permitting requirements? How do I manage the safety? What's the power requirements? So I can create a solution that can be movable in a few days, not weeks, and requires next to no infrastructure. We can just set it down and then we go, and then trucks can come in and refuel. And that's how we're thinking about infrastructure differently as well. And so I think that's a key part of the overall solution. And again, if you looked at just the truck and you weren't thinking about that, you won't get the operational availability that you need for that vehicle to deliver tons. Because ultimately, our customers want dollar per ton moved without any emissions associated with it. And that's what we've got to go and hit. That's ultimately what these systems are designed for.
Looking ahead, what are you most excited about? And obviously being the CEO of First Mode and obviously all of these projects that you're involved in, what really excites you?
I think what's really exciting for me is just the opportunity that's ahead of us. We've got a pathway, and I'm sure the journey is going to take us in different directions as we grow. But one of the big things that's always kind of attracted me is the oversized impact that we can have on decarbonisation. We're about 300 people today. We'll probably get up to 400 or so by the end of the year, and then we start deploying, and it's like it's relatively small team that can have a huge amount emissions impact by just taking off a fleet of the ultra class trucks and decarbonising them. So I think that's the opportunity that we see, and being able to then take that and drive it into other industries. And as we build the team here, being able to attract, the more amazing talent that we have today and building a team that can go and deliver that mission. I think that's the really exciting thing. The capability that we're building here that can be able to be pointed at different problems is really exciting. We're obviously very much focused on haulage now, but like I talked about, whether it be freight, whether it be maritime, whether it be gensets, who knows? I'm sure there'll be other use cases that we're not quite clear on now that will pop up. But I think what's exciting, like I said, is building this capability and just being able to really harness it and focus it on these big problems.
And concluding, what's the outlook for the remainder of the year for First Mode?
So really, we're focused now on what we're calling our minimum viable demonstration, the next generation vehicles. So we've ordered 2 ultra class trucks to go down into our proving grounds, and we recently announced an order with Ballard for our fuel cells to go into those. We've ordered our batteries for those, and so the key components all coming together. We're starting. We're in negotiations right now to get liquid hydrogen supply and hydrogen supply down there as well. So targeting by the end of the year to have that starting to come together. And then in 2024, have that demonstration units moving, and we'll be constantly evolving those. And we're looking to an arc to get in 2025 to start delivering into the mine site in South Africa during the second half of 2025. And so that's really where everyone's pointed and focused. So this year is just really about getting our engineering designs done and start basically pulling the system together.
Julian, really appreciate your time and give us an update, obviously, of First Mode, what you do. It's an important, obviously, subject within the mining industry. And I think this podcast or this episode will appeal to quite a lot of our audience. So if they want to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, got any queries, also want to follow the story of First Mode and what you're doing with Anglo America and maybe adopt that within their mine site, how can they go about contacting you, and how can they follow you across any social media platforms?
Sure. So obviously, the first place is go to our website, firstmode.com. Or go follow us on LinkedIn as well. And then just follow myself on there as well. I have some post stories and what's going on as I come into Seattle and meet people. So yeah, please. And Rob, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today and share with your audience what we're doing here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time. Like I said, it's an important subject, and it's going to be, I suppose, more evident within the mining industry and other industries as we move to sort of zero carbon and decarbonising all of our industries. So yeah, it's an important subject that you've covered today. So obviously wish you well for the remainder of the year. Perhaps you want to come on next year and give us an update on how things have gone.
Yeah, no, that would be great, Rob. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, thank you for listening. Hope you've got many takeaways from this episode. Obviously, it's something that's important within our industry, within our mining industry. So appreciate if you can share this episode amongst others within the industry, and also others outside of the industry, because I'd imagine if you're in another industry, some of the principles that Julian and First Mode may adopt may be used in your industry. So appreciate if you can keep sharing these episodes so to get the message out to others around the world. So until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.